Yeah, hi, good morning, everyone. This is Varun. Thanks everyone for joining. I'm one of the founders of Link CXO. We have Ganesh as on the call. And we have two esteemed speakers today with us, Mr. Balaji and Mr. Rohit. I'll let them introduce themselves in a bit. We're essentially covering topics around what happened during the COVID, how has it impacted the banking sector, um, what's the digitization future within the sector, and then we'll quickly cover in terms of the more macro economic factors going forward that are going to change the sector. So, so what we'll do is we'll start. If you, Mr. Balaji and Mr. Rohit, if you guys can please take time to just quickly to introduce yourselves, and then we'll start with the questions, and then right at the end of the discussion, we can have a question and answer round.
Sure. Good morning. I hope I am visible and audible well.
Yeah, you're absolutely fine.
Yeah, hi. So, good morning, everyone. I'm Rohit, and I'm a banker. And it's been more than 15 years that I've been a part of banking industry. And I've been into wealth. I've been into branch banking. I've been into corporate banking and all various facets of the banking. I've worked. I worked into, and I think it's a pleasure to be coming live with all of you, because I'm sure today is going to be a cross pollination of many things which I'm sure I will also take away with me. So I'm looking forward to yes, while I'm supposed to answer some of you, but looking forward to a fantastic learning out of this session. And would look forward to a good insight also. Thank you.
Thanks, Rohit.
Yeah. Hi, good morning all. I'm Balaji. I'm from Mahindra Finance. So I'm not as young as Rohit. I got 25 years of experience. So currently I head the mergers and acquisitions for Mahindra Finance. And also I lead the investments into fintechs. This happened pretty recently, just a couple of months back. Prior to this, I was handling the SME lending business as the business head. And I was also heading the marketing and strategy for the financial services business of the Mahindra Group. Prior to this, I was the corporate head office of Mahindra, that was in from 2005 to 8. Prior to that, I was in FMCG at ITC and then with Nestle. I look forward to a very good interaction with all of you and looking forward to an engaging conversation.
Sure. Thanks, Balaji. Thanks, Rohit. So we can start with some of the questions, I think, which we believe, I think you guys are the right set of speakers to address. We can't escape the COVID topic, obviously, considering how it's impacted the economies worldwide, and especially within the banking sector, right? We keep hearing about, the NPAs in the banks, have risen across the 3 quarters of last year. And then, the collection efficiencies being down, of course, during the lockdown, the loan disbursements weren't happening. So just if you guys can just, throw some light on what are your views on, where does the banking sector is today, both the smaller NBFCs and some of the bigger PSUs. And, and if there are any long lasting impacts you think that COVID has left on the financial services sector, which might change it forever.
So, just to begin with, since your question is very focused, but I would like to just speak, 1 minute about something, which is a precursor to this, financial numbers. The kind of issue what, as a world we all faced, it was a problem related to medical. It wasn't a financial stuff. So nobody had the pre-experience of, handling such kind of thing. What happened in 2008, it was related to a financial problem. And, basis some precedences, basis some, wisdom and kind of experiences, people could do some switching on to strategies and other things. What happened last year, I think nobody had any answer. I remember just about a year back, everybody was talking very bearish. Everybody thought that the world is gonna get ending up, the financial conglomerate's gonna get finished up, there'll be nothing left over. I've seen CEOs of a very famous hotel CEO almost crying, breaking, and saying that I don't know the future of our industry. So we saw a lot of things happening. And I think in hindsight, when I look back, I think the human race, with its spirit, has been able to come out. Yes, there would be some impact on the business numbers. There would be some impact on the financial balance sheets. There would be some impact on the, on the capex. But overall, if you look at, how last year was and where are we today, I think, the markets are talking more about, and they're justifying that, the expected, recovery, by INC across India, globe, Europe, America, anywhere you go. I think it's expected to really, really, do well. And I think when you look at the numbers from, global GDP, from Morgan Stanley, UBS, Credit Suisse, any report you refer to, any single report, I think everybody is expecting it to be doing well now in next, coming months and coming years. So I think, when you talk about banking per se, which you were asking, banking on the impact of COVID on banking. I think one thing, even before COVID, as a banker, I think, and even Mr. Balaji would echo the fact that, India was trying to move on to a digital kind of economy, because that's the way forward. So I think, it's a blessing in a disguise that, the kind of transactions which happen right now, you'll be surprised, when you look at the transactions which are happening right now, only 12 to 15% transactions are cash. Most of the, transactions which are happening right now, they are through a digital mode. So in a way, I think COVID has, really, really helped people, move on to a digital way of banking, because I think we have more than 700 million, internet users, and it's going up with every passing year. And considering that the demographic quotient we have, and the kind of financial inclusion we can do through a digital banking by, including Aadhaar and, couple of other things which are running on by government also. I think the banking is looking good in terms of the inclusion on the digital side. So, yes, overall, it's looking good. Banks are cash rich. If you talk about today, you were right. There is not much of the credit offtake in the country. As of some days back, banks are stacked up with more than 7 lakh crore rupees of liquidity. So there's enough liquidity in the banking, in the banking industry, in the financial domain. It's just that, since the vaccine is come, the results are very good. So you will see, the credit offtake also happening, and government has already started talking about capex on roads, highways, and corridors between Delhi, Bombay, Kolkata. So this will all, you'll see the ripple effects and cascading effect coming up in some months to come.
Agreed. So yeah, I think during that time there was a huge, people always were debating whether it's going to be a V-shaped recovery, whether it's going to be a U-shaped recovery. So we're starting to see the upsides, like you rightfully said, and and hopefully things will come back to the pre-COVID levels, right? Mr. Balaji, do you want to add something on that?
Yeah, Rohit covered it pretty exhaustively. My simple take is as follows. Due to the COVID, there was an abrupt lockdown, and there was a virtual stoppage of many activities, barring the non-essential ones. This led to the supply chains coming to a grinding halt. So therefore, if the goods could not be produced, obviously it could not be consumed. And this led to demand getting impacted at two levels. One, because of non-availability of goods and services. That was one. And two, more fundamentally, since the rules of the game, especially the rules of work engagement, was changed significantly, what had happened was that the demand for many products and services got reset. For example, if you take a simple case of apparels per se, since people were then supposed to work from home, you did not require the regular office formal wear that you normally otherwise required. So there was a demand. But more importantly, there was also a psychological impact. There was an increased risk aversion, because of which people started fundamentally focusing upon, is a particular good or a particular activity, is it actually required or not? This caused recalibration of demand for multiple goods and services. So how does it impact the overall banking sector per se? One, since there was a lockdown, the demand was muted because of supply side shocks. So the viability of many businesses were under question. And here, for example, the government, along with the central, that is the Reserve Bank of India, played a significant role in easing the cash flow constraints by offering loan moratorium and others. What they did was twofold. Since there was a complete virtual entire lockdown till May, and after that the economy started opening up, so cash flows started getting back into the businesses. Yes, it was not at 100% levels of the pre-COVID levels. It started at 40, 50%, and by August, September, it had come to 80, 90%. But since there was a moratorium on loan repayments, the businesses were able to use this cash flow with themselves. So some of the liquidity stress got alleviated to a certain extent. This coupled with the fact the operating overheads got reduced significantly. Therefore, they had got a breather per se. But the second most important thing, not because of what the banks or larger lending institutions did, but because of what the customers or the corporates did, there was an increased risk aversion, which I mentioned earlier. So the entire focus was on deleveraging. So to that extent, the jobs of the banks became subsequently pretty easy. So if anybody was requiring a credit, it was unless it was essential, they would not have approached the bank. And this was reflected as what Rohit mentioned, the credit growth was muted. So what we are seeing this is a slimming down effect of the various businesses. They are becoming much more efficient. They are saying that relying on borrowed capital for growth is not the right recipe. You need to have your own skin in the game or enhance your own equity. This was there. And because of the overall lockdown and the recalibration of demand, the one positive thing which has not been mentioned very much in the media is that the savings rate, the household savings rate has increased significantly. Today, for example, the overall last year, the last few months, the domestic savings rate is the highest in the last 20 years. Now, because of the increased savings rate, the deposits at the bank are grown to very significantly high levels. Now, therefore, while there's a depression as far as the interest rates are concerned, now as businesses become much more comfortable with the lower levels of debt, they will again start investing, and then we'll be getting back to possibly higher levels of growth in the next 3 to 4 quarters.
Okay. And so, I think you are absolutely right about the savings rates being higher in 2 decades now, right? And there's also, so once all that money is sitting with the banks, there's then a problem on this. So the demand side, right? Like you said, so there was a lot of deleveraging that happened. The demand's not high, and there could be excess liquidity in the market, which again creates a problem, right? So as the economy picks up and most of the sectors come back to normal, I do believe that the demand side problem is going to be solved as well. But do you guys believe there are any long-lasting impacts that COVID has done on the economy or the mindsets, or per se how the financial services sector is going to operate going forward, whether it's in terms of underwriting thesis or how they look at digitization? Just if you can throw some light on that.
So I think, if you talk about, the mindset, impact of this, I think like Balaji was talking about, that people have moved on to essential. I think now the differentiation is that people only talk about what's relevant in terms of spending, in terms of, going ahead with their kind of extravaganza on, whatever they do. But also, considering like, you were mentioning, Mr. Balaji was mentioning that the saving rates, they have gone up. You see, currently, there's a vengeance, kind of, I think shopping vengeance, thing happening. You talk about hotel industry right now, occupancy in some of the places. I went to a very, very, sought after brand in Delhi, and I was surprised to see people were queued up, and I think I've never seen this thing happening in our country. There's a vengeance, buying happening because these saving rates have gone up. I think, fundamentally people have understood what's relevant, what's not relevant, and the spending is happening towards that. Since saving rate is there, I think you will see the demand coming back. As you said, liquidity is there. As of now, when you look at the markets, on the both the sides, BSC, NSE, anywhere in the world, you see markets going right through the roof. Look at the current forward price earning of the market. It's hovering around 19 right now, right? 1 year forward P, I'm saying. And I think with the earnings going better in the years to come, because earnings have to come back to, pre-COVID level. So I think fundamentally you will see things, getting back in shape. Yes, now coming more towards the digital, part of, the digital, benefit of this all thing would happen. In banking right now, more than 80% of the transaction, 85% of the transaction, they happen through digital mode. You talk about tier 1 city, tier 2 city, tier 3 cities, all these kind of cities now, they have completely moving on to a new era, which is digital. And I think even before COVID, as I mentioned in my initial remarks, that, we were trying to move to digital. To that extent that, every bank understand that, having a digital, application or having an internet banking in the mobile, in the laptops, it's like having a branch with yourself. In your pocket, you have a bank branch. It helps you to cut the cost. It helps you in efficiency and also the financial inclusion, because nowadays through Aadhaar, through CIBIL, you can have a, kind of a multiple product correlation can also happen through that. So somewhere I think, it is going to help in a positive side. And digitally, the transactions which are happening right now, I can tell you, these credit card and debit card usage has already gone back to pre-COVID level. The digital transaction through UPI and wallets, they are in the range of 44 to 56%. So already a lion's share has moved on to, that kind of thing. I'm sure you are banking with many banks into private sector also. When you open your app, it asks you that, are you interested for a loan? Already essential loans, kind of advertisements are running on these, mobile apps, and you see it rambling across, banks. Because nowadays, because of that financial inclusion through a digital mode, you have the CIBIL score, you have the KYC, you are doing the video KYC. The blessing happened through COVID that earlier it used to be a physical KYC. Now people have moved on to video KYC. Because of that, it is helping us in penetrating, getting more accounts, doing more products, cross-selling, everything. I mean, each kind of thing. The largest transaction, since both of you, have been a part of merger and acquisition, the Paytm got a very, very large share of money from, from outside last year. And, currently, one of the Indian, businessmen, one of the most sought after businessmen, he sold his stake in last 6-7 months and raised multi-billion-dollar, kind of a chunk from outside, right? So, when you look at all this, why is it happening? See, we are a country where most of people who are millennials, 65 to 70% people, it's a demographic quotient right now. And I personally believe that, there may be blips because of any event which you don't foresee, tomorrow something else may come. There have been, viruses in the past. I still remember AIDS is still not curable. Cancer is not curable. People have learned to coexist. Similarly, I think COVID gave, us an opportunity to move everything on digital platform. Even kids today, they have started taking classes. Everything is now going pretty smooth. Yes, there are always goods and bads, but I think, it helps in multiple ways. I think it helps in cutting bureaucracy. It helps in, fast and seamless execution, better experience, saves time, saves every kind of thing, and becomes more efficient because you don't have to have the same number of people which you generally have for a traditional kind of a financial, banking system and all that. So I think, I believe that, in India primarily, outside, last year, if you talk about US, there are the two big banks, they shut down some of their branches last year. In India, I think, branches shutting down just, because of having a digital mode may not be a good option, because India as a country, traditionally, we want to have a, brick and mortar thing in place to put money. We may cut on staff, we may have smaller size of branches. So digital has to be way forward, but it has to be in a good combination, and it has to be amalgamation of a physical and a digital thing. And it's helping in a real big way. I can tell you that right now, each and everything, whatever we do in our banking system, 85 to 90%, it's all happening through digital. So that's the way forward. It's like a bank in your pocket.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Rohit. So I think we will cover digitization and what are the risks that sit within, right? And most of us do worry about having money taken out of our account or being defrauded by certain individuals, right? And you keep hearing those cases. So we'll come back to that part. But Balaji, I had a question from you in terms of the reforms that RBI introduced right after COVID, right? Whether to allow moratoriums for repayments, and then later on towards the latter part of the year, they gave one-time restructuring options as well. Do you believe those measures were effective, or do you believe there is something else that should have done that the RBI and the government should have done? In term also because some of the smaller NBFCs found it really hard to then raise the money to lend money, right? So the shadow banking got affected quite a bit. So just if you could address that.
So let you ask me two questions. Let me answer the first one first. Whether the RBI's measures were adequate or not. Just rewind back to September 2020. The estimate was that the incremental NPAs on account of COVID would be to the tune of 9 lakh crores. Now just roll forward to 4 months down the line, January. The expectation is that the incremental NPAs on account of COVID would only be 3 lakh crores. So basically the additional stressed accounts would be as reduced by 2/3 from 9 lakh crores to 3 lakh crores. This shows that the measures taken by the central bank were fairly robust. Yes, one could always argue that the additional thing needs to be provided. But we need to understand one simple thing. The amount of space available, the fiscal space available in the country is pretty limited. We are not in the United States, wherein we can just keep on printing dollars without a botheration about the fiscal deficit. So we need to be bothered about the credit rating, about the overall fund flow into the country. In this context, the steps taken were pretty robust. And because otherwise what could happen is we would have just ended up kicking the can down the road. The 6 months moratorium announced by the central bank, at least in my view, is reasonably sufficient because the moratorium was in place when the lockdown was there in entirety and the economy was back close to 75 to 80% back of its pre-COVID level. That was fairly substantial. And it was in this time, the enterprises also were able to recover some portion of their business operations compared to the month of April and May when the lockdown was virtually total. Now, coming back to the second question, the fund flow to the BFCs, especially the smaller ones who are impacted. Yes, it's happened. But typically what happens whenever any crisis takes place, it's like now this is the COVID crisis, or if you go back to 2018, when the ILFS defaulted, again, there was a mini crisis. Or if we go back to the 2008-9 global financial crisis, at any time when a major crisis happens, it's the smaller players who get impacted first. The rationale being told, bankers develop a knee-jerk reaction. They believe that big is better. That's one. So that therefore the credit flow to the smaller one dries up. Secondly, nobody ever gets penalized for lending to a very large institution and the loan going bad. But there have been lots of questions asked if you give a loan to a smaller institution or a smaller business entity and the loan becomes bad, then lots of questions get asked. That was a thing. But actually, to do this, the central bank came with a lot of schemes and the credit flow to the smaller NBFCs started easing from the month of July onwards, like the LTRO and NABARD had a specific fund, SIDBI had a specific credit lines. So what we are talking about, actually credit flow to the smaller NBFCs dried down, or dried is possibly not the right word, stopped, came to a standstill in the months of April to June. But that was very much the case even for larger organizations per se. And if we actually look into it, if you look at some of the RBI statistics or the state bank's investor presentations, what's visible is that for the smaller NBFCs, subsequently the credit flows actually increased. It is for the people in the middle who were excessively leveraged. The limits were reduced to a certain extent so that they had to resort to raising more equity. To a certain extent, all this led to a overall strengthening of the NBFC health. The one set of NBFCs which were affected were those which were relying on wholesale lending, especially to sectors like real estate and others. They were in a bit of a sticky wicket, but over a period of time, that is also getting resolved because the realty sector itself has been in a bad shape for the past few years. And because of code and other steps taken by the government, this cleaning up of the sector is happening, and over a period of time, we should be able to see healthy traction in that segment also.
Okay, thanks, Balaji. So I think so now related to that, and I know Rohit already touched on that. He spoke about, because one of the things we did want to discuss is, are we looking at a branchless banking kind of a model? And he believes no matter any amount of digitization will never lead to a completely branchless kind of a model. So even though it expedites a lot of operations within the bank, but that brick and mortar branch model will never go out of existence. But what are your views on that? Like, do you believe that slowly, as COVID has now put caution to the wind and banks have adopted digitization at a much more speedier pace, when you do something at such haste and with such a short time limit, there always a risk of exposing yourself, right? So in terms of whether it's the actual customer experience or the loss of customer data, or in a worst case scenario, loss of funds. So, so what are your views on that?
So I would concur with Rohit's view. There'll be an increased adoption of digital channels for utilizing various products and services. But at the end of the day, we need to remember that banking is based on trust. And trust to a significant extent comes from human to human interaction. And therefore, to that extent, branches would continue to play a very significant role. Yes. Now, what would change would be the type of interactions we have at the branches. Say, for example, for a simple deposit or a simple withdrawal of cash, over a period of time, it would all get into the digital mode per se. Like many banks per se, for example, virtually 99% of the transactions have become digital. The number of cash deposits and cash withdrawals has come down significantly. So for simple transactional activities, it would get through the digital channels, where we would see it will be significant, whether the branch banking, it would be for other services, value-added services per se, it would be there. Now, if whether it would call death of branches, possibly at this point of time, the answer to that would be no. When I say the answer to that is no, at least for the next 5 to 10 years, because the entire banking practice is a function of the people's attitude and behavior towards the category per se. We are intrinsically more comfortable dealing face to face rather than dealing with a faceless entity. And that's what digital does. So while there'll be AR and VR would proliferate, the hygiene level of transactions. But whenever, say, somebody wants a loan or somebody wants to do some financial planning or want to look at, for example, one of the key areas where people go to a bank even today is because of lockers. Everybody opens up a locker in a bank and stores something, or any of these things, people would go to a bank. That's what they would try to do. That would still continue per se. So the way forward would be, I would say, it would be like a two different schizophrenic manner. What would happen is in terms of high value transactions where they believe that the bank would be in a position to provide them valuable advice, they would approach the branch per se. Say, for example, somebody wants a housing loan. Today, although many times people, the DSAs get in touch with an individual and reach out to you at a place, many times people still go to the bank, not just to understand what is the eligibility, but what are the best deals it's possible for them to get. And apart from that, do they also know what are the other projects possible? So they see the bank officer not just a pure dispenser of a financial product, but more like a counselor. So that sort of a value-added services will increase. People will go to that for that. Or for example, financial management or planning, it would increase. So that would be taken off. And for all the other things, right, it would be pure digital. It will keep on taking time because we need to understand there are various segments of people. People who are more than 60 years, they are still more comfortable transacting physically, and that would continue a period of time to change. And that brings us to a critical thing. And both these feed into each other. If your service digitally is not seamless or frictionless, then it would erode the trust in the physical services that you provide and vice versa. So every bank or any financial institution need to press the pedal on both ensuring a heightened customer experience physically as well as providing a frictionless experience digitally.
Agreed. I agreed. Couldn't agree more. So now, Rohit, if you want to answer this, what do you believe are some of the, like, as we have expedited this whole, I mean, even though we were digital in the past, but operationally, so transactions is one thing, but operationally within the banks, they've started to add a lot of technology at the back end now, right? What are some of the security issues do you feel, that sit within the framework right now, and what are the kind of measures that banks are looking at right now to address those security risks?
So I think when you use a digital platform, security comes at the forefront, and I think some days back, with one of the very very big private bank, the Apex bank also came came into the picture, and there was some issue digitally on the back end. So I think around 2016. The Apex body has laid down 12 security measures, and all the banks now in last 6-7 months before COVID, when it all started, all the banks are implementing all those security measures, which covers length and breadth of all kind of transactions, all kind of compliance, and also securing that there is no breach of compliance. The client details are not kind of shared with people, and the framework which has been designed by the Apex body, all the banks are implementing that. And I think the kind of frauds which happen, they are not that you are using a transaction and somebody is hacked. It happens that you share your password, your OTPs and all these with people, and then it becomes a mess. So eventually, when you go for any kind of transaction digitally, the details which are shared with you, I think any customer or every customer is supposed to keep those details with themselves, because all these transactions are executed nowadays with one-time password kind of a thing, or there are passwords linked with your cards and linked with your bank account. So I think when you look at all the things which ramble in terms of fraud happening on the digital side, they happen when anybody shares those kind of information with the caller or with somebody else. Otherwise, the framework is very very strong, I can tell you, and all the measures, because if you don't make sure that your framework of security is very very robust, I think this entire purpose of moving digital will go futile. So all the banks, I can tell you right now, are very very particular in implementing all the recommendation to safeguard the interest of customers, which has been laid down by Apex body. They all are right there, and everybody is very very stringent on them, very very stringent, I can tell you. It only gets compromised when when people share their OTP, or I mean all these things. Otherwise, when you get a pesky call, people telling you that I'm calling from XYZ, I've sent you a number. I mean, see, that's in my view, it's not a lacuna in the digital banking. It's just because that somebody is calling you up over a mobile, or you are sharing your password. I think that's. I don't think that should be looked at, as a part of some, flaw in the digital processes of the bank, or maybe the financial system.
So essentially, you're saying, apart from isolated fraud incidents that might happen, it's essentially if there is any data loss or funds loss that happens, it happens more from a customer's end as opposed to the bank's end. Is that a fair way to sum it up?
Yeah, because even I would like to share with you one more thing. From look at the total journey of a client, into a banking or a financial space. When you open an account, nowadays you put a fingerprint of yours on a machine. It's a iPad kind of a thing. You put your thumb impression, and it goes to the Aadhaar website. From that UIDI website, that gets authenticated. Your own KYC gets done. Which means, unless from the beginning of the journey, you put your thumb there, nobody can hack you. Right now, nobody can take your thumb away, right? So the accounts get opened. The video KYC gets done immediately by that journey of moving on to Aadhaar and all that thing. The transaction, when you do the first transaction, you do an immediate transaction through all these IMPS, RTGS and NEFT modes, and you execute that, right? So all the transactions which are happening are only happening with the intervention of the person who's been inducted on that, that platform. Only, fraud or these kind of things happen in isolation when you compromise on your passwords and you share your details with others. Otherwise, I think all the frameworks and securities are pretty beefed up. And generally, when clients come to branches, I think, if the footfall, say, for example, if there are 100 clients coming into a branch in a day, you have hardly 1%, even not 1%, such kind of complaints coming to you. And nowadays, even if you want to do, any kind of value-add services in terms of, any changes other than locker, nominee addition, address change, everything happens through now, OTP and digital mode. You don't have to give a physical request nowadays. You just punch in, you get a OTP on your mobile. I mean, if you look at this, unless you share your personal detail and the password and debit card numbers or credit card numbers, there are no ways that, your, things can be, kind of compromised, and you can come on a risk.
Balaji, would you like to add something on this?
I think Rohit covered it exhaustively. Now, the only thing I would like to add is that compared to a bank, the information security requirements of an NBFC is significantly lower. Banks are much more transaction intensive compared to NBFCs. But having said that, it becomes much more important because everybody is trying to reach out to a customer through digitally, and a significant portion of it happens outside the company's control. You're having partnerships with third-party players, whether it be for credit underwriting or for document verification or getting access to some other information. Lot of pipes are being built to get access to a lot of data streams. So information security is very, very important. And that's something is an area which we need to watch very carefully going forward. While fortunately, we haven't had large-scale exposures with regard to customer data being leaked, we have to just be paranoid and assume that one thing is around the corner and ensure that we take significant steps to manage it. And there's no point blaming that, for example, this is an area where I may disagree with Rohit, in the sense that many times it happens at the instance of customer. Ultimately, if there's a leak, right, we could all bother about who's at fault later, but the damage is already done. And at the end of the day, the bank or the financial institution's reputation goes for a toss much more significantly. So we need to idiot-proof the entire security architecture per se, to say that even if somebody wants to misuse it, the chances for misusing it reduces significantly. That is the approach which we need to take. The privacy law is one step in that regard. Because what is going to happen going forward, possibly in the next 2 to 3 years, the RBI would come out with the right to suitability. Until now, the financial services are not a part of that. As per the right to suitability, in case if a customer complains, under the current rules, the onus is on the customer to prove that there was a deficiency of service. Whereas under the right to suitability, the onus falls on the institution to say that its service was proper, it did not miss the entire thing changes. That's something similar to a credit card versus a debit card. In a credit card, if I dispute a transaction, the transaction is reversed, and the bank has to confirm back to me, state that, okay, this transaction happened. Whereas some of us would have added in a debit card, we run to post, banks do nothing about it. The same thing would happen. So we need to be prepared for that. And more importantly, since people say that data is a new oil, so hackers are getting more and more innovative. I would not say that this is just a catch-up game for the information security experts. We need to be paranoid and build multiple layers of defense to ensure that the integrity of the company systems and the sanctity of the customer's data are well protected.
I agree. So it's I think the simple thesis is prepare for the worst and hope for the best. So this right to suitability, what is the likelihood of this, the banks being included within this in the coming years? Is that in active conversations right now?
See, this was a part of the report on comprehensive financial services, for which the key lead was Dr. Nachiket Moore, and this was submitted to the then RBI Governor, Dr. Raghuram Rajan, in 2014. So now there are significant steps taking place everywhere, because one of the things what we need to understand across sectors, we are transitioning from a seller's market to a buyer's market. And therefore, earlier the seller used to safeguard all their interest and the buyer was left high and dry. Each of us would have had experience when you're buying a house, right? The deemed date of delivery is X, and then it comes after 2 years or 3 years, and then you have no recourse. But now you're seeing there's a delay as per RERA, you're getting some compensation, although it might not compensate you entirely as a beginning. Now, this would come everywhere, because the one thing that people are more and more getting wary of is the mis-selling, because there are significant targets everywhere. Now, Rohit would know it better. Like the person at the branch, he has got nothing. He's got not only servicing the customer, he has to sell them some mutual fund products, insurance products, any other things, etc. And therefore, when people are under pressure, their performance incentives are on the line, and possibly in extreme situations, a job is also on the line, they may push something down the customer's throat, which could possibly be inappropriate. So while rules are getting strengthened, we should not wait for the regulator to make it a necessity. It would be better if each and every individual institution takes it and tries to ensure that what they are doing is in sync with the customers. Because if you are able to deliver the customer what they want, delight them at possible instance, it might be suboptimally from a transaction perspective, but over a period of time, it would ensure that we're having a bunch of well-satisfied customers, and that would ensure that the business is sustainable over the next few years or the medium to long term.
Okay. So one of the things we also wanted to cover was from a macro standpoint. Now there is a lot of talk about either privatizing some of the PSUs or merging some of the PSUs, right? And there's been activity on that in the last 2 or 3 years, right? Do you believe that's a right move on government's part to consolidate some of these bad loans and put them under one umbrella?
Provided that bad loans are created, that's the most important. But if we want to step back, right? Just try to see now, each move, at least I'm an honest taxpayer. Why should the taxes one pays keep on going to prop up someone who's consistently losing money? That's the philosophical debate. And two is the government a rule maker or should both a rule maker and a player? You have to either choose, I want to be the rule maker, I want to be the player. You cannot have both. And I think leave it to your imagination. If you can extend this analogy to multiple arenas, you'll find the absurdity of this. That's what the government is trying to do. So that's something it's welcome. And because what would then happen? Because the government's primary role is to ensure there's a better governance through a set of rules which are easy to understand, interpret, and follow. That's one, so that people are going over it. And ensuring that anybody who does not follow it, there are adequate redressal mechanisms for the affected parties to ensure that their grievances are taken care of. To that extent, it's a thing. Possibly, does it mean if two banks are getting privatized and others? I would have been happier if people had said, okay, fine, these are the constraints which public sector banks are facing with respect to private sector banks with regard to the operating degrees of freedom which they are subjected to. If a trust is given for them to participate at the same degrees of freedom which the private sector banks enjoy, it would be better. Obviously, it might not be good news to the private sector banks because then these PSUs have got significant reach and customer base, and therefore they could give them a run for the money. But that something is good. And coming to the second point that you mentioned, bad bank, the entire thesis possibly is there's a growth mindset, that's a turnaround mindset. And it's very difficult for the same organization, same entity to display both at the same point of time. So now by ensuring that the sticky loans are moved away, then you can, it's like starting afresh, and you can start afresh and try to do what is best. It's a very good move. But again, as I mentioned earlier, what are the steps put in place to ensure that the recurrence of these bad loans is minimized? It cannot be made zero or eliminated, but how does it get minimized? That would be interesting to wait and watch.
Thanks. Rohit, what are your views on this whole government initiative?
So I think disinvestment is inevitable. I think, if you just talk about, the largest, public sector bank, SBI, has been there into existence for last many years. More than 40, 50 years. It was Imperial Bank earlier. Look at the private banking space. All of them got license. Most of them, the big two, they started in 94, 95. Look at the market cap of these banks vis-a-vis, the government, government or PSU-owned bank. There's a big difference. All the PSUs, they had, they have clients, they have branches, distribution, everything is there. But look at the efficiency, look at the profitability, look at the way, infrastructure is being used. I think, they are lagging behind, though there are reasons for that. But still, the famous case study, see a BSNL. There was a time BSNL used to be the only player. Look at the market cap 20 years back and today. All the private sector, players, they have taken over. They are, they are far, far ahead. Because when you disinvest something, the idea is not to just, penetrate, but also to make a unit profitable. Currently, there's a debate going on around airline, the Air India thing also. In my view, disinvestment is going to really help into PSU space. Consolidation is going to help. And I think when you move on to, moving on to a profitability metrics instead of doing human service, I think that really helps. And as of now, I think that, all the PSU banks, they have, a huge client base, but I don't think, they've been penetrated pretty well. Like Mr. Balaji was referring to, on a lighter side, that when you go to a bank, they sell other products also, out of choice, out of chance, out of client need. But I think what's the harm in it? If you have client base, the penetration, if you talk about our market vis-a-vis, bigger markets, the penetration of all the products other than fixed deposit and, the debt side products, it's very low. The total number of, the demat account, trading accounts in a country is just 4.5 crores. A country of 130, crore, people having just 4.5 crore. You look at the penetration. Why? Because just private banks or NBFC can't do everything. There has to be a same kind of legwork through PSUs. And I think though there has been a change the way, these people work, but I think disinvestment or a consolidation or merger over there is really going to help in a big way in penetration, in financial inclusion also, because as of now, they're very much, refined to only, kind of a cash transaction deposit, nothing much even as of now. So I think that should be favorable for the government, for people, for the market. I mean, all stakeholders.
Okay. Thanks. And I think I do want to utilize the rest of the time we have, at least a bit of it, in understanding your views on the latest budget that came out. There are mixed reactions about it. Obviously, the middle class is not too very happy because it wasn't much in it for them. But overall, I just wanted to understand what are your views on the implications that this budget has on the banking sector.
So I think, the budget, I would like to tell you something, for the first time, I think I've seen a budget where the government was not fearful of the fact that the fiscal deficit really went up, though it was lesser than what people were expecting. But you look at it, the spending on, health, the government has announced highest ever, percentage spending on defense and health. While, the path of fiscal prudence has to be there. And they're not saying that we'll run away from our numbers of current account deficit, fiscal deficit, and all those numbers. But, health is important. Saving life is more important than, fiscal prudence. And I think that was much needed. I'll come on to banking later, but I think if I cover budget, typically that what they've done, they moved to a production link incentive to 13 sectors. They are, if you look at the current, scenario of Indian, export, Vietnam and, country like Bangladesh, they are far ahead than us on exporting of, the garment stuff. And look at the production in our country. We produce largest amount of yarn. Despite that, these two countries, they have overtaken and they're far ahead. Why? Because I think in our total, the kind of infrastructure, what we have in our country, or infrastructure, physical infrastructure, onto the kind of ecosystem, what we give to, people to work, I think we lack there. So if you look at the kind of initiatives what have been announced in this budget, I think that's going to really, really help. You see a lot of announcements, they have happened that we're gonna, finish up our corridor of Delhi, Bombay in 3 years, 4 years. NHI has announced that 1 lakh crore rupees of, construction will be getting finished up in 4 years of the corridors of Kolkata, Delhi, and Bombay. I think, when you see a government spending happening, it always has a cascading effect. It always boils down to, other players also chipping in. So when you have all these activities happening, eventually this will lead to, upsurge in your economic activities, into the incomes, because when you, when you construct a road, the roadside, tea maker, the soap seller, the small tuck shops, they all pops up. And I think everybody, becomes the part of mainstream, and you see a cascade happening. So, when you have, a budget which is, kind of accommodative, which is forward looking, which is trying to maintain fiscal prudence, and also making sure that, the priorities are set, right, in terms of saving lives, putting more money in health. I guess overall, it's going to be a good one. Yes, I think when you look at the, the income tax slab, I really don't think, that's the right way of looking at any budget. We have only 6.5 crore of people who file income tax returns, out of 130 crore. Unfortunately, I think the circle of, getting more people into filing tax return has to go up, which is happening. You look at the YOY growth in terms of people who are filing ITS earlier and now. I think there is a uprise there. So I think, for the banking system at least, government, has been very, very accommodative. Yesterday also there was a RBI policy. And I think if you look at the stance, I think, be it government, be it RBI, it's very, very accommodative till next May 2021. They are not changing CRR. They are trying to keep money, at with the banks, because sooner, I think in some months from now, you will see credit offtake happening, though it has been slow till now. Look at the home loan rates. I think in last 15 years, that kind of a home loan rate I have seen around 2006, 2007. So there are all kind of efforts being made by government to make sure that liquidity goes down to the last mile, and the end user gets the money for expending for capex for their end use. And I think sooner you'll say you'll see things getting back into the same what they used to be. Just one thing also I would like to speak about. Look at the GST collection. Last 2 months GST collection has been really good, because when you talk about banking, banking is nothing. It's a industry which supports the mainstream. It's the main industry. So if the government is trying to surge the economy by various measures, so the banking will automatically come into picture. And when they are taking so many steps, so obviously the banking impact on banking is going to be really good in the times to come.
Okay. And Balaji, so there is talk about the fact that the government wants to make the FDI, some relaxation on the FDI, right? Which in the past has been a hot topic, right? So especially with the IFSC, the impact right now. So what are your views on how the budget is going to impact, or the implications of the budget on the banking sector, or just the financial services sector overall?
I think this was a well-rounded budget, because obviously we can't be expecting policy changes in every budget or tweaks in the taxation structure every year. To that extent, what this budget has done is pretty good, and that's possibly one of the reasons why many corporates leaders were very happy with it. And the second thing is the quality of the transparency was very high. The disclosures, one of the biggest thing was that earlier the FCI's debt was not taken as a part of budget. Now it's been subsumed into it, 3.44 lakh crores or something. So therefore, to that extent, it's a very welcome step. It would do if the quality of the disclosures is pretty high, then it would reduce a risk premium because people do not normally trust the figures that they get. Therefore, that would be good. And with regard to financial services sector, actually, this has been a very possibly much bigger than the previous 5 or even 10 budgets put together. You got FDI and insurance going up to 74%. One is not sure that that's possible. That's an easier thing to take. But the divestment of 2 PSU banks, one of the general insurance company, or even the listing of LIC, they are directionally the right steps. Personally, I'm not optimistic whether it would happen in this next financial year, that is 21-22. It's a long drawn out process, and if able to do the needful, it will give us significant benefits. And at this point of time, SARFAESI also has been extended up to 20 lakhs, all these things. So right now, I don't think financial services sector, whether it be banks or NBFCs, have got a big cost to complain. They just need to focus on better customer acquisition, offering them the relevant products, and finally do better credit underwriting so that payouts are not offered.
Thanks. So I think what I'll do is I'll just quickly, so thanks both of you. Thanks for everybody for joining. I do want to introduce, talk a little bit about Link CXO, and we'll play a quick video, introductory video. It's a professional networking platform where we do want senior leaders to connect with each other, collaborate, and then celebrate those collaborations. So there are sections which are AI enabled. We have chatbots which provides industry reports. We have business sections where people can offer their services. So I would highly recommend everybody who's on the call right now to go and log in on the app and explore it, and leave any comments. Obviously, if you feel there is a room for improvement, we're always willing to listen and improve. So thanks again, everyone, for joining. And Anam, if you can play the video, that'll be great. Quickly.
Yes, sure.
Are you hassled with too many irrelevant connection requests and messages? Let Link CXO connect you with the right opportunities and right people. With Link CXO, you can be part of an exclusive CXO community, organize and attend business events, and explore unique business opportunities. Our AI-powered chatbot delivers focused industry latest news and reports. An exclusive platform for C-suite jobs and AI-enabled recommended matches. a value-based network to collaborate and share ideas and monetize opportunities. Collaborate through business events and meetups. Celebrate achievements and friendships. Enjoy exclusive offers and benefits from our premium business partners. We are building an exclusive community of senior leaders who can grow, lead, and influence the professional and social world around them. Come, be a part of us.
Thanks. Before we log in, I just wanted to make sure that any of the participants, if they have any questions, we can spend a quick couple of minutes to address those. Okay. Okay. Thanks everyone. We're a little over time, but thank you. Thanks for such a valuable session. Thanks for time, and thanks for everyone who joined. Look forward to having you on our platform, and looking forward for your participation in our future webinars as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Varun. Thanks, Balaji. Thank you.
Thanks.